A Mississippi man pleaded guilty to a federal hate crime after burning a cross in his neighbor's front yard to intimidate his black residents. Now, Axel Charles Cox faces a maximum of 10 years in prison and up to a $250,000 fine. Let's say in both nearly a 2-year ago case, which happened on December 3rd, 2020, Cox made a threatening and racially derogatory remarks toward his neighbors. He said he put together a wooden cross, let's say, on his front lawn, doused it with motor oil, and set it on fire. Now, federal prosecutors say that Cox, he's just 24 years old, that white supremacist, admitted and say he did so because of his neighbor's race and the fact that they had been occupying, let's say, the house next to his. Now, Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark, she's the first black woman, let's say, to lead the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, noted and say that the burning cross did not happen in a historical vacuum. Say burning a cross, it invokes, the long and painful history, particularly in Mississippi, of intimidating and impending physical violence against black people. According to what Clark wrote in the statement, the Department of Justice will continue to prosecute those who use racially motivated violence to drive people away from their homes or communities. Now, on Thursday, this white supremacist entered a plea deal that has him admitting to one of the 2 counts of the indictment. The hate crime statute punishes those who use force, threatens force, or intimidates based on race, sex, or national origin because they were renting or occupying a dwelling. Now, Cox already had been serving, a 8-year sentence for drug possession and receiving stolen property, according to the Mississippi Department of Corrections. Now, he's just a career criminal, as white supremacists. At Cox's arraignment in September, prosecutors obtained a warrant to transfer the convict from state prison to federal court to face the hate crime charges. The cross burning incident occurred some 17 months before his unrelated lockup. According to Assistant Director Luis Casada of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division, emphasized that people should be free from threats and intimidation. The FBI's and our law enforcement partners will continue to bring to justice anyone who violates the federal laws designed to ensure civil rights and are protected. Now, this is the thing here. Let's say this. These white supremacists, like I said, when you say, oh, it's 2022 or about to be 2023, it's in the culture of the white supremacists to hate black people. It is. And if you can't figure that out, I don't know what I can tell you at this point. I'm not trying to even convince you at this point because I get it. It's in the culture of white supremacy, anti-black racism. Burning crosses is anti-black racism and this white supremacy culture. Now, I said the U.S. Attorney, Darren LaMarca, from the Southern District, of Mississippi, praised the collaboration, between the local and federal authorities. We will continue, to work with, and for the good people of Mississippi, to eradicate, such racist intimidation out of their community. Now, Cox's attorney did not say anything, in response to an email requesting a comment based on his sentence. During, his Senate confirmation hearings during the 2021, Attorney General Merrick Garland vowed to make civil rights a focal point, of his leadership at the Justice Department, and provided a history lesson to illustrate, that point. Celebrating the DOJ's 150th year reminds us, of the origins of the department, which was founded during Reconstruction, and after the Civil War. Now they talk about, now let me tell you something. Yeah, you may found it after that, but you know what? It was a great thing that happened during the black people. During Reconstruction, black people were protected by the Union troops. When they had the Great Compromise and they pulled out the Union troops, and they started right after that, all these white supremacists started coming up with these Jim Crow laws and black codes and everything else. So let's not even talk about Reconstruction. Reconstruction was a very, prosperous period for black people, those 10 years after the Civil War, if you know your American history. But these white supremacists, like I said, they're going to do what they do. I understand that. But this is why, they talk about their numbers and all of that, hey, it doesn't bother me because I'm just sick of the anti-black racism. And then when I travel and go different places, like I say, I just came back from Kenya, I didn't have to think about any of this. This is beautiful. That's why I tell black people there is life, but you don't have to think about this stuff all the time. And some of you, you're so used to it, you thinking it's around the corner everywhere. White supremacists aren't omnipresent. They're not. Even white supremacy itself isn't omnipresent, folks. It's not. It's around, but it's not omnipresent. It isn't God. Because some of y'all are so afraid of white supremacy that y'all can't even enjoy anything. Now, I always tell y'all, enjoy your life. Do something different. Because sometimes I tell you, don't get caught up on these people. These people are ate up with hatred for black folk. And it shows. But let me know what y'all think about, this white supremacist being, sentenced for burning a cross. Burning a cross. They still cross burning, folks. Still cross burning. So when people tell you, oh, that was the 50s, it happened. No, that's still happening.